Imagine a quiet, sterile afternoon in a Munich laboratory in 1992. The air is thick with the scent of chemicals and the hum of high-precision machinery. Dr. Svetlana Balabanova, a forensic toxicologist whose reputation for accuracy is legendary in the scientific community, is performing what she believes to be a routine analysis. Before her are fragments of hair, skin, and bone from Egyptian mummies belonging to the Munich Museum's prestigious collection. Her task is straightforward: to identify the biological fingerprints of ancient life, perhaps traces of disease, specific diets, or the environmental conditions of the Nile Valley thousands of years ago. She calibrates her mass spectrometer, a device capable of detecting the smallest molecular traces, and begins the process. She expects to find markers of grain-based diets or perhaps the telltale signs of ancient parasites. But as the data begins to scroll across her monitor, the atmosphere in the room shifts from professional calm to utter disbelief. The sensors are flagging substances that have no business being there. The readings are clear, unmistakable, and terrifying for anyone who respects the established timeline of human history. The screen shows high concentrations of cocaine, hashish, and nicotine. These were not just faint, accidental traces that could be dismissed as modern equipment errors. These were significant, habitual levels of these substances, deeply embedded into the very cellular structure of mummies dating back as far as 3,000 years. In that single moment, the official story of the human race, the one taught in every school and written in every textbook, didn't just bend. It snapped. To understand why this discovery felt like a physical assault on the world of archaeology, we have to look at the botanical border that historians have spent centuries defending. In the early 1990s, the official historical position was absolute and non-negotiable. There was no contact between the old world of Africa and Eurasia and the new world of the Americas before Christopher Columbus arrived in 1492. This wasn't just a theory, it was a foundational pillar of modern history. The problem Balabanova created was a chemical one. Cocaine comes from the coca plant, or Erythroxylum coca, which grows exclusively in the high altitudes of the Andes Mountains in South America. Nicotine comes from the tobacco plant, Nicotiana tabacum, another native of the Americas. Before the 15th century, according to every mainstream expert, these plants simply did not exist anywhere else on Earth. If Balabanova's findings were correct, it meant that 3,000 years ago, someone was moving goods across the vast, terrifying expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. It meant that the primitive, ancient world was actually a globalized network of trade and exploration. It meant that the history we have been told for generations is, at best, incomplete, and, at worst, a deliberate lie. When Balabanova published her findings in the journal Naturwissenschaften, the reaction from the scientific community was not one of curiosity, but of immediate and brutal hostility. She was not met with requests for more data. She was met with accusations of incompetence and fraud. The gatekeepers of history declared that her results were the result of contamination. They argued that the mummies must have been handled by 19th-century archaeologists who were heavy smokers, or that Victorian-era explorers had somehow spilled cocaine on the remains during transport. Some even suggested that the mummies themselves were fakes, modern corpses dressed up to look ancient. The logic of the academic establishment was circular. Since a transatlantic trade in 1000 BC was impossible, the evidence proving it must be a mistake. Dr. Balabanova was subjected to institutional pressure and ridicule that would have broken a lesser scientist. But she was not a woman who backed down from the truth of her instruments. She knew her methodology was flawless, and she knew that the chemistry of a human body does not lie to fit a narrative. She had used gas chromatography mass spectrometry, the gold standard for drug testing, which separates mixtures into individual components and identifies them based on their unique molecular mass. The peaks on her graphs were as clear as a fingerprint at a crime scene. Over the following years, Balabanova launched a massive counteroffensive to prove she hadn't made a mistake. She didn't just retest the Munich mummies. She expanded her study to over 3,000 different sets of remains from various collections across the globe, including those from the Egyptian Museum in Cairo and several European institutions. The results were consistent and haunting. From Egypt to Sudan and China, the chemical signatures of the Americas kept appearing in ancient remains. She invited independent, third-party laboratories to verify her work using the most stringent contamination control protocols ever devised. They confirmed her findings. This was not surface dust. This was not a researcher blowing smoke in a lab. The substances were locked inside the hair shafts and the marrow of the bones. To explain this, we have to understand the difference between external contamination and biological ingestion. If you touch a piece of tobacco to a mummy's skin today, you might find nicotine on the surface. But if that person used tobacco while they were alive, their body would process the chemical and turn it into a metabolite. Balabanova found these metabolites, specifically benzoylecgonine and ecgonine methyl ester in the case of cocaine. A corpse cannot produce a metabolite. These are complex molecules formed only by the human liver as it attempts to break down and detoxify the drug. To find it in the tissues of a mummy means that the person had to be alive, with a beating heart and a functioning liver, to process the drug. The contamination argument was dead, yet the scientific world continued to act as if it were still a valid excuse. Then came the mummy that made dismissal nearly impossible, Henut Tawi. Known as the Lady of the Two Lands, she was a priestess of immense status from the 21st dynasty, buried with the highest honors of the Egyptian elite. Her wrappings were intact, her provenance was perfectly documented, and her burial chamber had been sealed for millennia until its discovery. When her remains were tested under the most rigorous conditions imaginable, the results were undeniable. Henut Tawi had cocaine and nicotine in her system. She was a woman of the high priesthood, a figure of the inner circle of Egyptian power. If she was using these substances, it wasn't a freak accident, it was a lifestyle. It was a sign of a trade route so established and so reliable that the most sacred members of society had access to the products of a continent that didn't exist to them. The presence of these chemicals in a high-ranking priestess suggests that these weren't just medicinal oddities. They were likely part of the ritual and social fabric of the Egyptian elite, perhaps used in religious ceremonies to induce altered states of consciousness or as potent medicines for the ruling class. The implications of Henut Tawi's toxicology report are staggering. If we accept the chemistry, we must discard the old maps of human history. We are forced to look at the possibilities that mainstream Egyptology chooses to ignore. The most logical explanation is the one that historians fear the most: organized, sustained maritime contact. We know the Phoenicians were the masters of the sea, capable of navigating by the stars and building ships that could handle the open ocean. We know that the mysterious sea peoples terrorized the Mediterranean with naval technology that surpassed anything seen before. Is it so hard to believe that 3,000 years ago, a fleet of daring navigators caught the trade winds and realized that the ocean was not a wall, but a highway? When we look at the ruins of South America and the ruins of Egypt, the coincidences start to pile up. Pyramids with celestial alignments, complex mummification processes involving similar resins and salts, the worship of the sun. Mainstream science calls this independent evolution. The idea that different cultures just happen to come up with the exact same complex ideas at the same time. But the cocaine mummies provide the missing link. They provide the physical, undeniable evidence of the exchange. They suggest that the old world and the new world were never truly separate. Let's look deeper into the technology of the time. Mainstream history tells us that ancient Egyptian ships were mere riverboats, made of short planks of cedar or papyrus, unfit for the crushing waves of the Atlantic. But archaeology has found that Khufu's ship, a 140-foot-long vessel built with such sophistication that it could easily have been modified for deep-sea travel. Furthermore, we have the records of Pharaoh Necho II, who allegedly commissioned a Phoenician fleet to circumnavigate Africa, a journey of thousands of miles through some of the roughest waters on Earth. If they could do that, crossing the Atlantic using the equatorial currents was not only possible, it was likely. The journey from the west coast of Africa to the tip of Brazil is actually shorter and easier than many of the coastal routes the ancients took. Yet, because no smoking gun ship has been found at the bottom of the Atlantic, the Academy refuses to consider the possibility. They ignore the fact that wood rots and ancient wrecks are nearly impossible to find in the deep ocean. They demand physical ships, while ignoring the physical chemistry already found in the bones. There is, of course, a second theory, often whispered by those who want to avoid the America conclusion at all costs: the lost flora theory. This suggests that there were once species of coca and tobacco plants native to Africa or Asia that have since gone extinct. It's a convenient way to keep the maps intact, but it falls apart under botanical scrutiny. There is zero fossil evidence of such plants in the Old World. No ancient Egyptian herbals mention a local coca-like plant, and no seeds have ever been found in the thousands of tombs excavated. Furthermore, for two different plants to evolve the exact same chemical structure in two different parts of the world, a process called convergent evolution, and then both disappear only in one of those places is a statistical and biological impossibility. It's a desperate attempt to save a crumbling narrative. The third option, the one most often chosen by modern museums and universities, is silence. They simply stopped talking about it. They stopped funding the tests. They stopped the inquiry. The mummies are still there. The data is still in the peer-reviewed journals, but the textbooks haven't changed. Why? Because to admit that Balabanova was right is to admit that the entire framework of human history is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of our own ancestors' capabilities. Think about the broader context of what we call out-of-place artifacts, or OOP arts. The cocaine mummies do not stand alone. In 1950, a ceramic jar known as the Fuente Magna bowl was found near Lake Titicaca in Bolivia. When researchers finally looked at the inscriptions inside the bowl, they were stunned to find Proto-Sumerian cuneiform, the writing system of ancient Mesopotamia, thousands of miles away. How did a Sumerian bowl end up in the Andes? Then there are the Roman coins found in shipwrecks off the coast of South America, and the heads of Tecáxic-Calixtlahuaca, Roman-style terracotta heads found in a pre-Columbian burial site in Mexico. When you add the cocaine mummies to this list, a pattern emerges. It's not a list of mistakes or forgeries. It's a map of a world that was far more connected than we ever dared to imagine. We see the precision of the Great Pyramid, the 100-ton granite boxes of the Serapeum, and the unexplained stonework of the Andes, and we are told these were the works of isolated people with copper chisels and hemp ropes. Nohimia говорит нам об обратном. It tells a story of a world that was connected, sophisticated, and vastly more mobile than we are led to believe. The cocaine mummies are the smoking gun of a forgotten global age. They prove that our ancestors were not confined by the horizons we've drawn for them. Why does the academic world fight this so hard? It's about more than just dates and maps. It's about the ego of modern man. We like to believe that we are the pinnacle of human achievement, that we are the first to truly master the planet. To admit that the primitives of the Bronze Age were crossing oceans and trading across continents is to humble our own sense of progress. It suggests that history is not a straight line of improvement, but a cycle of rise and fall, of grand civilizations that achieved greatness and then were swallowed by time, leaving only chemical traces in their bones to tell us who they really were. The story of the cocaine mummies is a reminder that the truth doesn't care about our comfort. It doesn't care about our textbooks or our tenure. It sits in the dark of a museum, in the marrow of a priestess, waiting for someone brave enough to follow the evidence wherever it leads. The scientific community often claims to be objective, yet when faced with data that threatens the status quo, they act with the same dogmatic fervor as any religious inquisition. Svetlana Balabanova wasn't just fighting for her data. She was fighting for the soul of science itself, the idea that facts should lead the way, not the other way around. If we reconsider the Egyptian worldview, we find that they were obsessed with the land of the gods, a place they called Punt. For centuries, historians argued over where Punt was located. Some said Ethiopia, others said the Arabian Peninsula. But the Egyptians described Punt as a land of exotic riches, of gold, of incense, and of plants that didn't grow in the Nile Valley. They launched massive expeditions to Punt, led by powerful figures like Queen Hatshepsut. Is it possible that Punt wasn't just a coastal neighbor, but a collective name for lands across the Great Green, their name for the sea? Could the legendary voyages to Punt have taken Egyptian sailors much further than we've been willing to admit? If the Egyptians had access to the Americas, it would explain many of the lingering mysteries of their civilization, from their sudden spikes in technological advancement to the presence of materials that shouldn't be there. It would also explain why so many South American cultures have legends of white gods or bearded teachers who arrived from across the sea, bringing the gifts of civilization, architecture, and law. The case of the cocaine mummies is a cautionary tale about the dangers of intellectual arrogance. We assume that because we have smartphones and satellites, we are smarter than the people who built the pyramids. But the ancients had a different kind of intelligence, a deep, observational knowledge of the earth, the stars, and the oceans. They didn't need GPS to find their way. They had the rhythms of the planet. They didn't need plastic to preserve their dead. They had chemistry that we still struggle to replicate today. By dismissing the possibility of ancient transatlantic trade, we aren't just protecting a timeline. We are insulting the ingenuity of the human spirit. We are choosing to believe in a small, disconnected world because it's easier to manage. But the evidence, the physical, chemical evidence, refuses to stay buried. It screams from the strands of hair of a 3,000-year-old priestess. It demands that we wake up to a larger reality. As we look toward the future of archaeology, we see a shift happening. New technologies like LiDAR and advanced DNA sequencing are revealing cities in the Amazon that were home to millions, and genetic markers that link ancient populations across oceans. The wall of silence is beginning to crack. More researchers are beginning to ask the questions that Balabanova was punished for asking. They are looking at the trade winds, the boat designs, and the chemical signatures of our ancestors with fresh eyes. We are standing on the brink of a new history, one where the human story is much older, much more complex, and much more exciting than the version we were sold. The cocaine mummies were the first crack in that wall, and though they tried to patch it with silence and ridicule, the light is finally starting to pour through. Official history is a fragile thing, a series of stories we agree to tell each other until the evidence becomes too loud to ignore. The chemistry of the Munich mummies is that loud, undeniable voice. It demands a rewrite of the human story. It demands that we acknowledge the courage and the genius of those who came before us. It asks us to be as bold in our search for the truth as the ancient navigators were when they sailed into the unknown. We are not just uncovering the past. We are reclaiming it from the silence of the experts. We are filling in the blanks with the reality of a globalized ancient world, a world where the Lady of the Two Lands could enjoy the fruits of a continent thousands of miles away. The story of Henut Tawi is a story of a world without borders, a world where curiosity and the drive for trade overcame the fear of the deep blue sea. Why should this matter to us today? Because if we have been lied to about our past, what else are we being lied to about regarding our present? If our ancestors were capable of crossing oceans in wooden boats, what are we capable of? Understanding the true depth of human history gives us a new perspective on our potential. It shows us that we have always been a species of explorers, of innovators, and of survivors. It reminds us that impossible is just a word used by people who are afraid of change. The cocaine mummies are a testament to that spirit. They are a bridge across time, connecting us to a version of ourselves that we almost forgot. They are a call to action for anyone who believes that the truth is worth fighting for, no matter how many experts tell you you're wrong. Svetlana Balabanova's career was sidelined, her name often left out of the grand histories of Egyptology, but her work remains a silent sentinel for the truth. Every time a new discovery is made, like the Denisovan bracelet with its high-speed drill holes or the Fuente Magna bowl with its Sumerian script in Bolivia, the crack in the wall of official history gets wider. We are living in an era where the data is finally catching up to the mysteries. The cocaine mummies are not an anomaly. They are a key. They open the door to a past where the Atlantic was a bridge, not a barrier. They challenge us to look at the ancient world not as a series of isolated tribes, but as a grand, interconnected drama that we are only just beginning to understand. We must honor the work of those who risked everything to bring these facts to light. We must be the ones who carry the torch forward, who refuse to let the truth be buried under another layer of academic dust. In the end, the mummies of Munich tell a story that is both ancient and modern. It is a story of discovery, of suppression, and of the eventual triumph of the truth. It reminds us that we are part of a grand tapestry that stretches back much further than we realized. The chemicals in those bones are not just drugs. They are the ink with which the real history of the world is written. They tell of sails on the horizon, of gold in the mountains, and of a priestess who knew secrets that we are only now starting to rediscover. The forbidden chemistry is only forbidden because it threatens the power of those who claim to know everything. But as we have seen, they don't know everything. Not by a long shot. The real story is still out there, waiting in the sands, in the deep water, and in the very DNA of our ancestors. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden chemistry of the ancient world. If you believe that history is more than what we are told in school, and if you want to join us as we continue to tear down the walls of official silence, then subscribe to this channel. We are dedicated to bringing you the facts that the mainstream chooses to ignore, the stories that prove our ancestors were far more incredible than we've been led to believe. This isn't just about mummies or ancient plants. It's about the fundamental truth of who we are as a species. Click the bell icon so you never miss a step in our investigation, and share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the official timeline is a deliberate cover-up, or just a massive misunderstanding? Have you heard of other artifacts that don't fit the timeline? Let's keep the conversation going and continue filling the gaps of history with the truth they've tried so hard to hide. We are the generation that will finally uncover the real story of the human race, one discovery at a time. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and keep looking for the truth that lies beneath the surface. The world is watching, the data is speaking, and the silence is finally being broken. Until next time, remember, the past is not what it used to be.